On today's show, Giannis Antetokounmpo and the Houston Rockets. Is trading for the Greek Freak a championship caliber move or a gigantic mistake? It's all coming up right here at Locked On Rockets.
This is Mission Control, Houston.
Ignition sequence start. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
What's up and welcome to another edition of Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. As always, I'm your host, Jackson Gatlin, native Houstonian and credentialed media member. I'm also the host of Locked On NBA Thursdays. Be sure to follow along wherever you listen to your podcasts or on YouTube. Just search Locked On Rockets, where the best way you can help us grow our show is to listen every single day on a podcast platform of your choosing, and then like, comment, subscribe on YouTube. And as always, thanks so much for making Locked On Rockets part of your day every single day, whether it's on your way to work, on your lunch break, in the gym. Thank you so much for being an everydayer. On today's show, we are focused on Giannis Antetokounmpo, the rumors. Should the Houston Rockets trade for the Greek Freak? What would a trade look like? Would the trade for Giannis make the Rockets instant contenders, or would it be a gigantic mistake? And what other competing offers would the Rockets have to beat out to be able to land Giannis? We're going to talk about all of that and more on today's show. So where I want to start, before we get into the hypothetical trade packages, because there's a very specific set of packages it feels like the Rockets would have to offer to be able to get Giannis. And I've got a couple different versions of a Giannis trade cooked up for us to look at on today's show here in just a moment. But I want to lay the foundation here, the understanding of what trading for Giannis would mean for this Houston Rockets team. There are a number of different moves out there that could be made by the Rockets or not made, right? This team, even though I'm not one of the people sitting in the camp of don't do anything, run it back next year, let all the young guys continue to grow, right? I understand that sentiment from a lot of Rockets fans. Rockets were the number 2 seed in a brutal Western Conference. They have an incredibly young team. Let all the young guys get a little bit better, right? That's kind of the cautious optimism approach to next season. I don't subscribe to that notion, but I understand the mentality towards it. There are also moves out there, moves that the Rockets could make that would not inhibit them from being able to do just that and kind of give the young core some breathing room, allow them to continue to grow and develop and take some steps forward without completely cashing in as a total all-in move. That's what Giannis Antetokounmpo is. Giannis is the all-in move, because if you trade for Giannis, you are immediately, like, your championship window starts immediately. The clock is then ticking. Giannis is 30 years old, in the middle of his prime right now. And yes, he's a top 5, top 3 player in the NBA. And it'd be crazy to think that the Rockets wouldn't consider making a move for him or adding him if they had the chance to. But I want Rockets fans to very much remember this. First off, Giannis hasn't made out of the first round in the Eastern Conference in 3 straight years. And yes, you can point to the quality of his teammates. You could point to coaching with Doc Rivers. You can point to a number of reasons why Giannis has struggled. It hasn't been like he's been the one laying an egg in the playoffs. But one of the issues with a player like Giannis and his archetype of player is you need a team that is very much catered around his skill set. One of the conversations that we've had surrounding this Rockets team all season long is that it kind of feels like they haven't picked a direction yet, right? They don't know who they're, or not that they don't know, but they haven't decided who to truly build around yet, right? Are they building around Jalen Green? Are they building around Alperen Sengun? Are they building around Thompson? Right now, the Rockets just feel like a team that has a bunch of talented players that don't all quite perfectly fit together. And that's problematic. Giannis is a clear, like, you're building around that guy. You put the right pieces around that guy to try to win. And that puts the Rockets in a very precarious situation, because if you go all in on Giannis and you don't have enough assets left over, or if the pieces that you have left over don't fit alongside him, then you're just a worse version of the Bucks, but in a stronger conference in the West. So Well, I'm not against the idea of trading for Giannis in a vacuum. Obviously, he's a two-time MVP. He's a champion. He's one of the best players in the NBA, and he's going to continue to be a dominant force in the NBA for the next probably at minimum, like 3 years, right? He would keep the Rockets relevant for at least the next 3 years. But is that the guy you cash in on if you don't have enough assets left over, or if the pieces that are left over afterwards aren't complementary enough to have a fully functioning roster around him to where you could conceivably say, yes, this is a better team than what the Rockets could have had they just kept all their pieces, or it's a better team than what the Rockets could have had if they had pursued a different star level trade, one that fit their timeline a little bit better, or fit some of their existing players a little bit better. So that's the important thing that I want Rockets fans to remember as we discuss what a Giannis trade would ultimately look like, what the cost associated with a Giannis trade would look like, because that is the all-in move. That immediately starts your championship window, and you better be one of the best teams in the NBA. You better be contending for titles year in, year out while you have Giannis. And if you're not, then the trade makes no sense. Coming up, we're going to get into what a Giannis deal would ultimately look like, a couple different versions of the trade, and we're going to get there in just one moment. First, today's episode is brought to you by Wayfair. Look, the days are getting longer and the weather's warming up and people are spending more time outside, which means it's the perfect time to refresh your outdoor space. Whether you're working with a big backyard or a small balcony, Wayfair has everything you need to make it feel more like you. Wayfair's massive selection of outdoor essentials makes it easy to transform any space into your ideal summer setup. From comfy conversation sets to sleek dining tables and outdoor decor, they've got it all, and at prices that fit your budget. My mom just recently redid her patio and was looking for some patio furniture to kind of complete the whole look. I sent her over to Wayfair and she grabbed a patio set that she absolutely loves. It fits her space beautifully. The shipping was simple and seamless. They make everything so easy. The mix of styles that they offer, Wayfair is so easy to find pieces that match your vibe without breaking the bank and spending a fortune. So shop huge selection of outdoor furnitures online this summer. Get outside with Wayfair. Head to wayfair.com right now. That's wayfair.com, wayfair.com. Wayfair, every style, every home. And continuing on here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. All right, so laying the framework for what a Giannis Antetokounmpo trade would look like, you have to start with two specific players in mind on the Rockets roster. And those are the two best players, the two players that any team would want in a star-level trade from the Rockets, and that's Alperen Sengun and Amen Thompson. And I'm telling you right now, Amen Thompson is untouchable. Amen Thompson is not going anywhere. The Rockets are not moving him. It would take an unbelievable, it would take somebody like Luka becoming available again, weirdly enough. And I don't think we've got a Nico Harrison part 2 waiting somewhere around the corner for Amen Thompson to become available. So that being said, the one piece, the player who becomes the cornerstone of any Giannis trade, is Alperen Sengun. And unfortunately, from a fit perspective, neither of Alperen Sengun or Amen Thompson really complement Giannis very well as far as pieces that you would want on the team after a Giannis trade. Again, back to segment 1, talking about what the team would even look like after a Giannis trade. If you're left with pieces that don't fit, that don't perfectly complement Giannis's play style, then you're going to have some growing pains. You're not going to get the best version of this team possible. Now, you can live with two of Giannis and then Sengun or Amen. You can't make all three. There's no way you could make all three work on the floor, and there's no way you get Giannis without giving up one of Amen or Sengun. And because the Rockets are not trading Amen Thompson, it means Alperen Sengun to be included in any version of a Giannis Antetokounmpo trade. So that is your cornerstone. That is your building block, your first step of a Giannis trade. So let me pull up this first iteration of the trade right here. And this is one where it's just all the Rockets are getting back is Giannis. And they put up Alperen Sengun. And in this scenario, you would need to include one of Jabari Smith Jr. or Tari Eason. I would push very strongly for Tari Eason to be the one included, simply because Jabari Smith Jr.'s shooting and positional versatility is absolutely the kind of skill set that you would want to complement Giannis in a potential Giannis trade, or one of the types of players that you would want to keep on the roster. That being said, it wouldn't surprise me if the Bucks pushed for Jabari over Tari Eason. So that's worthwhile, and noting that it could be either of the Aries in this trade. You're going to include Cam Whitmore. Unfortunately, he's become kind of like the redheaded stepchild of this Houston Rockets team and one of the casualties of the rebuild, unfortunately. And that's sad to see, because I still think Cam has so much talent, so much potential, but you're going to have to include multiple young prospects in any return for Giannis. And honestly, 3 young prospects, Sengun, one of the Aries, and Cam, might still not be enough to get the deal done. They might push for both Aries, or potentially also pushing for Reed Shepherd to be included. And at that point, how much is too much, right? If you're giving up 4 of the members of the young core, including the best member so far of Alperen Sengun, right? A guy who played like a potential future first ballot Hall of Famer in his first ever playoff series by the numbers that he was putting up, right? That's a lot. That's a lot to give up. And then you get into the picks. And the picks are where it's going to be absolutely backbreaking. And I loaded up whichever ones I could see in the Fanspo trade machine. But essentially, it's every single pick the Rockets have access to. Like, that would be the absolute bare minimum in a Giannis trade. We've seen trades like this go down in the past. And yes, the NBA trade market has been reset a little bit here and there. But, if Rudy Gobert can command you, 5-6 first round picks, between outright picks and pick swaps and all this stuff, Giannis is going to command every single pick that you have at your disposal. And that therein lies a bit of the problem, right? Is if you cash in 3, maybe 4 members of the young core, and then you also are forced to go all your chips to the center of the table and cash in all of your picks, you're not really left with many assets at all to improve the roster after the trade. And so then you have to be very confident that the roster post-trade is a legitimate championship caliber roster as presently constructed, with no other additional moves. And so looking at this version of this trade, so Sengun, Jock, Landale for filler on the salary side of things, Tari Eason, Cam Whitmore, and a boatload of draft picks. That leaves you with Fred VanVleet, assuming he re-signs, Jalen Green, Dillon Brooks, Amen Thompson, and Giannis Antetokounmpo becomes your starting center. And that's the other thing, is would Giannis be okay and willing to be a full-time starting 5? Or would you have to then adjust the roster even further and figure out what to do about that starting 5 spot? Maybe Steven Adams starts at the center position, only plays 20, 25 minutes a night, and you do some funky lineups where you have some minutes of Giannis at the 5 and some minutes with Jabari at the 5. And, you play small for half the game, you play big for the other half of the game with Steven Adams. But if you have Steven Adams out there, and if you also have Amen Thompson out there, and if you have Giannis out there, then you have 3 out of your 5 guys on the floor can't shoot the basketball. That becomes problematic from a spacing perspective. But at least in this iteration, we'll pretend Giannis is the starting center. So Fred, Jalen, Dillon, Amen, Giannis. Off the bench, you're still left with Reed Shepherd, Aaron Holiday, Jabari Smith Jr., and Steven Adams. And I guess you have, some of the rest of the Stay Ready crew potentially mixed in there, right? Jayshawn Tate, maybe bringing back Jeff Green. Like there are guys that the Rockets would have to make some decisions on ultimately about what direction they're going to go. But that's your team. Now, in a vacuum, is that team better than this year's team? I want to say maybe, because you look at Giannis's sheer production and what he brings to the table. And yes, he's playing, he's a top 3 player in the NBA. He's right there alongside Jokic and SGA as far as being an MVP caliber force. But does that team complement Giannis? Does that team give Giannis what he needs to thrive? You're already playing with one other non-shooting player in Amen Thompson in the starting lineup, and those 2 guys are a little bit duplicative of each other. you take away so much of what has made this team effective with Alperen Sengun as a facilitating hub, as a screening hub. And my reservations come from the fact that we didn't exactly see, Giannis and Dame as a dynamic duo in a weaker Eastern Conference. We didn't exactly see them dominate consistently, right? And that seems like it should be a match made in heaven for a two-man game between one of the greatest guards to ever play the game in Dame and one of the greatest bigs to ever play the game in Giannis. And yet they didn't really find a ton of success as a duo. And am I supposed to believe that Jalen Green is going to find more success with Giannis as a pick and roll partner, as a two-man game partner, than Damian Lillard did? That's a bit of a tough pill to try and swallow. So that's one version of the trade. This other version gets a little bit more interesting, I think. And it involves still Alperen Sengun, but then you also put up Jalen Green. You include one of the Aries again in this iteration, Tari Eason, and then all the picks. So in this one, you manage to still keep Cam Whitmore, which becomes interesting because there's still an incredibly high upside value there to Cam Whitmore. But you're getting Giannis and you're getting Bobby Portis. And then at that point, you retain some of your depth that has made this team so effective this past season, right? The depth that the Houston Rockets had this past year was one of their biggest weapons, right? Being able to deploy the Terror Twins off the bench during that first stretch of the season, being able to rely on Jabari's positional versatility in the second half of the season once he started coming off the bench alongside Tari Eason. Like, there were a lot of things to like about the Rockets, like top 7, top 8 guys, and especially once you started factoring Steven Adams more heavily into the mix, their top 8 was really, really good. Their top 8 would still be really, really good in this version of this trade, because then you'd have Fred VanVleet, Amen Thompson, Dillon Brooks, Jabari Smith Jr., and Giannis Antetokounmpo would be your starting lineup. And then off the bench, you'd still have Reed Shepherd. You'd have Cam Whitmore to factor in. You would lose the support of Jabari off the bench. But you would gain Bobby Portis off the bench as a 4-5 tweener combo, big. And then you would still have Steven Adams services. So you become a little bit lighter on the wing. Essentially, you'd be starting 3 wings essentially between Amen Thompson, Dillon Brooks, and Jabari Smith Jr. But you'd be able to cycle through those guys, bring one out early, come back later with the second unit, that kind of thing. And I think I like the second version of that team a bit more, but it's also that version of that team lacks a dynamic perimeter creator, because then instead of your offense becoming Alperen Sengun and Fred VanVleet 2-man game, when, Jalen Green doesn't have it going, it becomes you don't have Jalen Green, period. And your offense is incredibly reliant on a 31-year-old Fred VanVleet as the dynamic pick and roll partner with Giannis Antetokounmpo full time, outside of Giannis just doing Giannis things and bulldozing the lane and getting downhill. That I don't think that offense would look very great. That offense would be tough to stomach. The team has a bit more depth because you get Bobby Portis back in the trade, and there's potentially a version of it where you could do that first version of the trade and still also maybe get Bobby Portis. But there are no shortage of different permutations that the Rockets could go with to try and acquire Giannis. But in every scenario that you can pitch, it's going to involve giving up the farm. It's going to involve giving up at least 3 of the young core 7. It's going to involve giving up every pick under the sun, and possibly more than just the 3, right? Possibly 4 of the Rockets' young players. And I understand the sentiment of you do whatever you can to go get a top 3, top 5 player in his prime, MVP caliber player, all that stuff, and you figure out the rest of it later. But if you don't have any assets left to figure out the rest of it, and if the roster is flawed, if you don't have the right pieces around it, then it just doesn't make sense. Again, you just become an inferior version of the Bucks, but in the Western Conference, which is the more brutal of the 2 conferences. So I've been coming at this and I've been trying to talk myself into it and it making sense. And I really keep coming away thinking, I think it might be a mistake for the Rockets to go after Giannis. And maybe that's delusional. Maybe it's a ridiculous standpoint for me to take, but it feels like the cost would be too high and the team that would be left afterwards wouldn't be a legitimate contending force in an unbelievably stacked Western Conference. That version of that Rockets team isn't better than the Thunder. That version of that Rockets team still might not be better than the Wolves or the Lakers once they fix up their roster around Luka and LeBron, or the current version of the Nuggets. And that's the problem. That's your barometer. Are you better than those teams? And I think the Rockets, as presently constructed, do clear some of those teams. And that's the dilemma at hand. Coming up, do want to discuss what the competing offers would potentially look like for Giannis, because it wouldn't just be the Houston Rockets bidding on his services. Who would they have to outbid to be able to get the Greek Freak in Houston? We're going to take a look at that in just one moment. And final segment here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast, home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. All right, so we kind of looked at this from a Rockets perspective through a set of Rockets lenses for the first couple segments. And I am very curious your thoughts, right? Are you pro Giannis? Do you want to see him in a Rockets jersey? Are you anti Giannis? Do you not want to see the team trade for him? I will be on it. I will be honest about Giannis. It's Susical the musical over here for a second. There is a little part of me that, based on like the loyalty to to James Harden during the James Harden era and that whole spat between James and Giannis, it would feel a little dirty to go trade for that guy, given the beef between Harden and Giannis. Maybe I'm the only one that feels that way, but I don't know. It's just a passing, fleeting thought that I had. The other team, so the Rockets, across a couple different areas have been, kind of betting favorites. There are two Texas teams that are the betting favorites to land Giannis currently, depending on where you look. And the other team, very obviously, the San Antonio Spurs. And, go back to draft lottery and the Spurs pick jumping up to number 2 overall. And it almost feels like the NBA just kind of decided, all right, we're going to hand San Antonio Giannis to pair with Wemby in the front court. That's what it felt like in the moment. And so that would be the biggest competing offer that the Rockets would ultimately have to beat, is the Spurs offer, which would be something along the lines of, salary filler in the form of Harrison Barnes, making $19 million. And then you have the reigning rookie of the year in Stephon Castle. You throw in Jeremy Sohan and, maybe a couple other pieces here and there to bridge the salary gap, because Giannis does make it's either $54 or $55 million, 54.1. So you have to be able to match that salary. But the cornerstones of the Spurs trade would essentially be the number 2 overall pick in this year's NBA draft, which essentially guarantees that the Bucks would be walking away with Dillon Harper, which is tell you what, if you're going to be moving on from your MVP caliber talent and you want to kickstart a rebuild in the right way, you could do a lot worse than getting Dillon Harper and Steph Castle back as your potential starting backcourt of the future. Now, whether those two guys fit next to each other, complement each other, that's besides the point. That is an incredible amount of talent to start with. And then you also still get Jeremy Sohan, another young piece on top of that. Maybe you factor in another young guy like a Keldon Johnson type. If you need the salary matching in there, that's a lot of guards. But and then you throw in all the Spurs picks, and the Spurs have accrued a massive number of picks over the years. They have different swap possibilities with the Atlanta Hawks. Hell, they have the 14th overall pick in this year's draft as well. So they can include number 2 and number 14 in this year's draft. They can include the picks that they got from the Hawks from the DeJounte Murray trade. They also have their own picks a little bit further down the line that they can throw in there. And in a vacuum, I feel like the Rockets probably have the more enticing trade pieces, but I think that the Spurs would be more willing to put forth the best overall package, because the Rockets have the two best pieces to put in the trade, which would be Amin Thompson and Alperen Sengun, but they're not putting Amin Thompson in a Giannis trade. So that leaves you with just Sengun versus the Spurs, who would be absolutely willing to put in the second overall pick, aka Dillon Harper, and Steph Castle, and probably also including that 14th overall pick. Maybe Devin Vassell. Like, I don't know. There's just shout out to Beam a Thug on Twitter, who ranked the assets or asked people to rank the assets that both teams have at their disposal. And I think if I'm ranking the assets, and those assets being for Houston, Alperen Sengun, Amin Thompson, Jalen Green, the 10th overall pick, and for the Spurs, the second overall pick, Stephon Castle, Devin Vassell, and the 14th overall pick. I think in order, you're probably ranking them: Amin Thompson, Alperen Sengun, the second overall pick, Stephon Castle, Jalen Green, 10th overall pick, 14th overall pick, and then Devin Vassell. And so the top end of that structure favors the Rockets. But if you're not willing to include both of Sengun and Amin Thompson, then it's kind of a non-starter, because it feels like the Spurs would be willing to put forth all of that in an offer. And so that's the trade package that you're contending with. And I haven't sat here and like truly combed through the pick packages for both teams. You can make an argument maybe the Rockets have a slightly more enticing pick package, given the fact that the Phoenix Suns are a total dumpster fire. Meanwhile, the San Antonio Spurs have a lot of picks from the Atlanta Hawks, and the Hawks have zero incentive to be bad or tank. And as long as they've got Trae Young, they're going to be at least pseudo competitive in the Eastern Conference. Meanwhile, it feels like the Suns are on the brink of true implosion here in a brutal West. The Hawks can kind of stumble their way into the play-in each and every season, whereas the Suns couldn't even break into the play-in tournament in the Western Conference this year. So that bodes well for the future of those picks. That Brooklyn pick looks incredibly attractive as a trade piece as well. So as far as the pick packages, the Rockets may have the edge there, but I don't know. I don't know if the Rockets package is enough to beat the Spurs package. And I also don't know if it's worth it for the Rockets. Imagining Giannis in a Rockets jersey and thinking about how the dynamics would have to shift. Now, I will say one thing, right? That Rockets defense would go from being already elite to being pretty unstoppable. Now, I don't know what it would necessarily look like with Giannis playing the 5 full-time. We've seen him play the 5 at points in Milwaukee. But generally speaking, he plays the 5 alongside Brook Lopez and Bobby Portis. And, he gets to play the 4. He gets to roam a little bit. Brook Lopez is a very specific style of big where he has to play in a very deep drop coverage. So you're kind of limited to one style, one type of defensive scheme when you're playing alongside him. Whereas the Rockets would be a little bit more equipped to do some different things defensively with Giannis. Hell, imagining the Rockets running out that zone defense with Steven Adams and then Giannis and Jabari on both sides of the zone. Who's scoring on that? Nobody, right? And then with your point of attack defenders with Amin Thompson and Fred VanVleet at the top, the defense would become even better. And I'd argue that the Rockets would become a top 2 defense in the NBA right there next to the OKC Thunder. They might even be a better defensive team than the Thunder. But I don't think it necessarily, I really struggle to see how it elevates you into another stratosphere offensively. From a sheer production standpoint, Giannis is going to score more than Sengun. He's going to produce more than Sengun. He's going to draw at least an equivalent, not even at least, he'll draw more attention, right? Downhill drives, double teams, that kind of stuff. But it's the ways in which they are utilized offensively that would feel drastically different. And if the Rockets still have a bottom 1/3 shooting team, if they still can't connect from outside, if shooters are inconsistent, if Jalen Green and Fred VanVleet both have years struggling from beyond the arc, then it becomes really easy for other teams to just game plan. And we've seen them build a wall to guard Giannis. And if the Rockets are unable to punish teams from the perimeter, then we're kind of back in the same boat offensively, right? The only difference is instead of Sengun face-ups and post-ups, we're talking about Giannis face-ups and post-ups. And yes, Giannis would be able to put up 25, 30 a game on pretty solid efficiency. But I'm torn, man. I'm really torn on this. Because in no world am I arguing Alperen Sengun over Giannis Antetokounmpo. But it's funny. I feel like a lot of the same I feel like I'm harboring the same energy that a lot of fans use towards Jalen Green. Like, oh, he's young. Give him more time. He'll get better. Meanwhile, I'm like looking at Sengun and I'm like, the dude put up like future Hall of Famer kind of numbers in his first ever playoff series. Like, yes, the efficiency was bad, and he knows that, right? The efficiency was bad all year. But if you take this year's version of Sengun and all you do is add in year 3 Shingun's efficiency from the floor, the dude would have been in MVP conversations. Like, that's how close he is to being that good. Now, what do you when I say in MVP, I'm talking he would have been in MVP conversations the same way Donovan Mitchell was in MVP conversations, right? Like, if you're a 50+ win team in the Western Conference and you're the 2 seed, the best player is going to be involved in some of those conversations. The dude basically put up 20, 10, and 5 throughout the year, and it could have very easily been 24 or 25, 10, and 5, right? If his efficiency had been a little bit better. And that's a big if. And I know that if is doing a lot of work in there, but it's not that we don't have some historical precedent for him being a much better finisher around the rim. It's not like he's been a bad finisher for all 4 years of his career, and we're suddenly like, oh my God, if he just figures it out in year 5. No, he regressed in year 4 after being a really strong finisher in the first 3 years of his career. I think there's evidence to suggest that Sengun could get back to that level. And if he does get back to that level, and if he gets back to that level as early as next season, how dumb will the Rockets feel trading him and more as part of a package for Giannis, a guy who is likely going to be on the decline in the next 3 or so years? Because as much as people might hate to admit it, and Bucks fans might crucify me for this, right? Giannis is a player that is very much entirely reliant on his athleticism. Like, Giannis, once his athleticism starts to decline, is not going to be the same dominant force that he is right now. Giannis doesn't have a skill set or a bag that is going to age very gracefully. Now, I'm not going to sit here and do the whole James Harden, run, all he does is run around and dunk. That's disingenuous. Giannis is one of the best players in the NBA for a reason, but it's not like he has this fantastic, reliable, perimeter game that he can fall back on as he ages, or that he relies on a bunch of craft and, dribbling and all this stuff to, generate his open looks. Giannis relies on being explosive and athletic and bigger, stronger, and faster than everybody else on the court. The moment he's not stronger and faster than everybody else, the moment he starts to slow down a little bit, that drop-off could be really, really ugly. We'll see what it ultimately looks like, but those are just my thoughts. That's my overall takeaways on the Giannis situation. We will definitely be revisiting this discussion. This is more or less a preliminary discussion than anything, because I'm sure this topic will follow us throughout the offseason. But I want your thoughts on the Rockets potentially trading for Giannis Antetokounmpo. Would it make the Rockets contenders? Would it be an absolute mistake? Give me your thoughts in the YouTube comments. As always, thanks so much for checking out the show. Remember, the best way to help us grow the show is to listen every single day on a podcast platform of your choosing, and then like, comment, subscribe on YouTube. But as always, thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for listening. And we look forward to having you back right here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball.